All right, everybody, we're going to wait just a couple more minutes. We still have folks that are logging on, and we'll get started here in just a few. Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming today. We appreciate your time and your interest. Today we're going to be talking about the regional optimization of resources through program mapping, which is a tool that we've had at ResourceX for a while, but now its time truly has come, and the moment is now for us to all take a look at it. A lot of us have probably been in this boat where we've been dealing with this COVID-19 crisis, and we're thinking about trying to apply the same old thinking, hoping to get different results. Well, we know that the status quo won't work. And we know the status quo leads to panic. It's leading to many organizations right now who are making decisions not predicated on hard data or information, but rather instinct and gut. And many times that includes just the ubiquitous cut your budget across the board with 5 to 10% cut, or whatever that percentage is. That doesn't work. The good news is, though, is that all of you are armed with some tools already as being clients of ResourceX, and even if you're not, we want you to tell yourself not to panic. You probably already put on your oxygen mask like these firefighters have before they go in to help others. And today we're going to talk some strategies about how to use program mapping to be able to reduce your panic and give you hope for the future. So we at ResourceX have created a 3-point plan. And over the last several weeks, we've actually been rolling out elements of this plan. So 2 to 3 weeks ago, we talked about our fiscal health planning and scenario tool that really has helped people to begin to get a good picture, graphical picture of the forecast of what their budget looks like amongst this current crisis that's been promulgated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Then last week, we talked about how to use your programmatic-based business intelligence data to make decisions predicated upon programmatic data that will help you to look for opportunities to make adjustments within your budget. This week, we're going to talk about program mapping, regional collaboration, leveraging the dollars that you already have in your region to make sure that they are going as far as they possibly can. And this, of course, is going to be achieved through regional collaboration, reaching out to your neighbors, your counties, other cities to ensure that you have an opportunity to share in the delivery of services, or look at least at entertaining alternative service delivery. So when we talked about scenario planning, we were honored to be able to work with the Government Finance Officers Association to talk about our scenario planning tool, and specifically to deal with this tension that exists between wanting to make sure that since this pandemic has hit and the COVID-19 economic woes that have emanated from that, we've been dealing with this decision to move quickly versus this tension of wanting to make sure that we have the most accurate information available. And so we've been trying to push out information and tools, and to remind you to utilize the tools that you already have at your disposal to make good decisions and to move rapidly, but yet cautiously. And we're so thankful again for the GFOA, who has again helped us with creating some checklists for approaching how to deal with these various shapes of recovery that we expect, whether it's the small V, where we've all seen a drop, and then hopefully we'll see some rapid gains back with our revenues, or a deeper V that goes deeper, but yet still has that rapid bounce back, the W, where we've seen the decline in revenues. Then when social distancing goes away, we'll see that rebound, but there could potentially be another wave of COVID-19 hitting and then causing yet another recession. Or, God forbid, we actually see the L. And like I said, we've been very thankful for GFOA helping us with some checklists that hopefully you're all starting to use or look at ways to take short-term or near-term decisions that will help with shoring up your finances, or as we're going to talk today, some approaches to hopefully what we won't see is the W or the L type recovery. But even if we don't, the notion of regional collaboration is super important, or regional partnering is very, very important for us. So how do we do that? Well, again, we talked about scenario planning a couple weeks ago. Scenario planning is really helpful. It gives us that visual so that we can show our staff, our elected officials, our community, what it might look like for impacting our fund balance, impacting our reserves, as well as indicating when and where we're going to see trouble. It's a lot like the check engine light in your car. It's somewhat helpful. It basically says, hey, you've got a problem with your budget. You have a problem with your finances. But if we think about it, we move then to program inventory, programmatic-based business intelligence. That's a lot more like the electronic control module, ECM, for your car. That gives you more intelligence as to where to look specifically for the issues that you might be facing, rather than just the benign or somewhat aggravating check engine light that comes on. So hopefully you've been able to move your organization from scenario planning with the check engine light to the business intelligence provided to you by PBBI to help with making some decisions. Well, if that's not enough, we know that programmatic-based business intelligence is like the iceberg. Above the water, we know that it's really good for management decision-making and also for making budgetary decisions. But we also know that if you look below the surface, there's a whole host of other things that your programmatic-based business intelligence can be used for, including what we're going to be talking about today, which is program mapping. So program mapping, we're going to talk a little bit about what it is, and then I'm going to turn the time over to Chris Fabian, who's going to get into the how, the what, the why of how to use it, and then come back later and talk specifically about how do you differentiate between different opportunities and what do we do to implement a regional approach to collaboration. So what's program mapping in the first place? Well, first and foremost, it really does not require one to actually have programmatic-based business intelligence data. You can actually find an organization that may be adjacent to you to actually take that data and match up your programs and services to someone who has that data. That's the beauty of it. One of the best things that we advocate to all of our organizations in the first place is to actually use their programmatic data internally. Where you have duplicative work and programs going on, where you can actually start to have conversations to eliminate that and consolidate that work within one department rather than multiple departments, and hopefully gain some efficiencies of scale and as well as cost. The purpose really of program mapping is to create the space for conversations on how to leverage your taxpayer resources. And what we mean by creating the space is taking yourself away from your day-to-day work, the struggles of figuring out how to make the train run on time for your organization, and actually sitting and talking about true collaborations and way to do that with your neighbors and with other levels of government. So program mapping really is the next logical step. Once you've already taken a hold of the GFOA checklist for the V, the big V, the W, and the L, where do you go now? Well, where you go now is to look towards regional collaboration. Whether you do that for the short term or the long term, the key really is to start to have some conversations about partnerships. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my time over to Chris, and he's going to tell us the why, what, and how of how this works.
Thanks, Eric. I am attempting a partnership here with my screen sharing. Let's see if I can be successful. Very cool. Thanks for setting the stage, Eric, and for all of you listening in. Whoop, I have, my Zoom is actually restarting. All right, I think I'm back. Success? All right, cool. Hey, that was classic, right? I have an introduction to program mapping. And as Eric set the stage for us, we have our envisioned scenarios, the little v, the big V, the W, the L. And the fact of the matter is our current experience is something like what you see on the screen. We've lived the first part of the downturn, and we kind of have this ... We're not exactly sure what's going to happen next. It's possible that we do get the bounce back. That's what we're really hoping for, and I intentionally made that bounce back a little bit higher than what we went into it with. That is clearly what we hoped for. There is the possibility, as Eric mentioned, that we recover only to have another setback with shelter-in-place policy hitting our economy again. And then, of course, there's the possibility that we have an L. And our belief is that knowing that we're kind of in the ... phase and we're not sure what's going to happen, we sure hope that it's a V-shaped recovery and it's quick. The realization is if a W or an L do materialize, we only have so much time to plan ahead for what that might look like. And the economic consequences could be so severe. Our thinking is the time is now to look for things like programmatic partnerships, which can promise a very good solution if our resources are so immensely constrained. How can we partner with others in the community? And that is why this tool, why this approach is something we wanted to get in your hands today, so you can start to get your plans together and have your options open for whatever materializes next. Our thinking on all of this originated back in some of the earliest days of PBB. This is San Jose City Hall. You can give San Jose credit for the basic program attribute in your PBBI data for Reliance. San Jose was already, back in the Great Recession, dealing with seriously constrained resources, and they simply wanted to know, can we tag each program using a basic program attribute with insight about, are there any others in our community who provide a particular program? And that was a key attribute that's open to all of you, and that's how it was born. As it's turned out, we did a review of all of the programs in our database over in preparation for a ResourceX Summit. This is actually 2 years old. 125,000 programs at that point. We were studying across 200 sets of data. And for those who had tagged their programs with the Reliance attribute, what was really fascinating was that approximately 60% of our budgets were invested in programs where it at least looked like there's somebody else who provides the program. Whether or not you advance a partnership or not, at least there was opportunity, where something around the order of 40% of the programs represented things that, at least as we had tagged Reliance, nobody else was available to provide it. It was uniquely up to you and your local government to provide it, because there are no other options overall. And so as we went one step further with this, there was the opportunity to sort on, is it a private sector partner? Because in Reliance, there's the scale. Is it another public sector partner? And so on, we could differentiate. So it's exciting to think about, I use exciting loosely, but the fact that there is opportunity here, maybe this is promising. And our next thought was, how do we kind of maximize discovering these opportunities? Some of our earliest inspirations for partnerships actually came from work with Eric Keck. When Eric was in Inglewood, many of you have seen this slide so many times before, but it's such a simple one and it's profound. Eric had a fleet operation, a garage, and found a way to offer those services to the nearby city of Sheridan and also Cherry Hills Village and the Inglewood School District. Such a simple example. And it wasn't like Inglewood is this booming metropolis that just had all this extra capacity in their garage and they could insource fleet. They were a modest city, and looking out towards two other neighbors who, from their perspective, the costs of providing fleet were high, doing it on their own, and they could pay less to the city of Inglewood. Inglewood, yes, they had to staff up to meet the new demand, but they could charge new revenues that were in excess of the cost increase. This is exactly what we were thinking of. And now, as we're thinking about you all positioning yourselves for 6 months from now, the question might be, how many of you have opportunities like Inglewood Fleet to consider looking out towards your neighbors, smaller cities, nonprofits, even the private sector who have fleet needs, and then what other programs lend themselves to this type of thinking? Washington County, another early inspiration, they simply took their priority-based budgeting business intelligence and they shared their program inventory with neighboring counties. Super simple. They just had their list. They arranged a meeting. They called their initiative Counties Without Borders, and they were able to discover opportunities where everything from a health department consolidation to ways that they are handling their parks programs overall, discovering dozens of programmatic partnership opportunities overall. So our question then began to be, how can we get more Inglewood Fleet opportunities, and how can we drive more Counties Without Borders types of examples? One way, I know Shane Kavanaugh has joined the call. GFOA's new book, Financial Foundations for Thriving Communities, has a specific set of examples, including Washington County and Inglewood there with Eric Keck, about network enterprises. This is a great playbook to read and try to mimic the types of experiences that are shared in this book. And we would highly recommend that you research these as you're starting to plan towards how can you maximize your partnership opportunities overall. In addition to the book, we've given this a lot of thought in terms of how, from an entrepreneurial perspective, your organization can think about where you look more like Inglewood Fleet, let's see, and you have an entrepreneurial opportunity to generate revenue for your organization. You might be really well positioned to sell services to other entities. And imagine it in an extreme situation where everybody is looking at a W or an L. They might be unable to provide their whole suite of services as they've done in the past. The times have changed. So if you think that maybe you don't know that being entrepreneurial and generating revenue and starting your own centralized fleet operation is going to work, I would simply say the times are different and ripe for this opportunity. On the other hand, opportunistically, where can you be more like Sheridan or Cherry Hills Village in that example, and look for opportunities to take advantage of other larger service providers who might be able to provide a service and you simply are able to pay them. This is resource optimization on a community-wide scale. And so besides in addition to the networked enterprise examples in GFOA's book, what I want to introduce you to is this idea of a program map. And that's what we will get into next. As we've envisioned this, the goal is maximizing partnership opportunities and execution. You see on the left-hand side, we've thought through a three-phased approach to this. I'm really going to hit on some phase one components of the approach, how to identify as many opportunities as possible through program mapping. And then Eric is going to talk a little bit more about once you have opportunities, once you have a list of things that you could do that seem like really plausible, high value opportunities, how do you qualify them and differentiate and prioritize those opportunities, and then move forward towards implementation and execution? In the conclusion of Eric's presentation, here's somebody who has performed the partnership. He did manage to merge fleet services. He's even done it with fire departments, which are most controversial. So I look forward to hearing some of Eric's insights on phase 2 and phase 3. But let me start with phase 1. How do you approach identifying as many opportunities as possible for partnership through this strategy, this tactic, this tool called program mapping? One of our experiences, I know Stacy is on the line from Littleton and Eric from Inglewood, was taking 2 neighboring organizations who had gone through and developed their program inventories. And in their experience, it was as simple as hosting a workshop and gathering people to share their program inventory data, being able to look via the portal of the tools. They just shared, here's what we do, here's what the other organization does, and they were tagging programs literally for opportunities for partnership overall. In this environment, maybe you can't get together, but a virtual Zoom like we have going on right now might be a perfect experience to host a program mapping workshop, just like Littleton and Inglewood. Here we see Littleton's snow removal program and being able to understand some things about how that program is provided. Inglewood and Littleton discovered, I remember City Manager Mark Ralph from Littleton's epiphany moment was seeing utility billing and wondering out loud, maybe this is a good idea, maybe it's a harder one, but while cities have their own distinct, unique approach to providing certain programs that might have a Littleton feel to it or an Inglewood feel, when it comes to utility billing, maybe that hometown feel or that signature DNA of how that program is provided is less important. And so utility billing emerges as a potential opportunity. And that's just by sharing program inventories with one another. Eric Keck and I had the chance to do a program mapping experience that looked very much like Littleton and Inglewood, and we did this in Moffat County, Colorado. Moffat County is, for those of you who don't know or haven't heard this story before, they are not in a densely rich urban setting. It's actually rural, and we weren't sure that program mapping would lend itself so well to a perfect example because there just simply weren't that many service providers overall. But we were pleasantly surprised with finding the opposite. What happened, the county arranged to bring the county seat, the town of Craig, a community college, their school district, and their hospital together. So as you're starting to think, who makes sense for program mapping, it literally could be many other organizations besides simply local governments. In this case, the hospital and the community college who came along. One of the most memorable examples was the hospital discovering that Moffat County provided laundry services in their detention center and their nursing home. The reason that was intriguing was the hospital has a huge laundry demand, but since they had simply assumed that nobody in tiny Moffat County provided laundry services, the hospital was outsourcing it, driving a delivery vehicle back and forth to the next closest laundry facility in Grand Junction, which is 2.5 hours away every single week, not realizing that right across the street in their own backyard was an organization who offered laundry. And here's a program partnership idea on the table for something that they could do together. So as you're starting to think through this as well, oftentimes we gravitate towards large solutions for program partnerships like, hey, we should merge a 911 call center or police operations or fire departments. And sometimes that is a barrier to program partnership discovery because you're starting with the most complex ones when something as simple as, hey, can you provide your laundry service operations entrepreneurially to another entity in town might be a great solution for your organization. So how many laundry service ideas can we come up with? That will depend on, can you share your program inventory with some of your neighbors and actually get these opportunities documented. What was pretty wild in Moffat County, 59%, this actually fits really in line with one of the opening slides I shared, 59% of their budget tied up in programs that one of the other entities provided. So that 60% marker kind of sticks in our minds. Again, just proving the point that it could be a really good opportunity area for you. City of Toledo, Ohio did a partnership, a program mapping exercise with their Chamber of Commerce. Chamber of Commerce was a great player, a stakeholder, because they represented the private sector. And Toledo simply shared their program inventory. The Chamber of Commerce reviewed it and could develop ideas for ways that the private sector could actually help the city provide or offload or create a partnership for some of their programs. Street sweeping was one of them that came up for a public-private partnership. City of Toledo, it's a $4.2 million program for them. And the idea from the Chamber's perspective was there are certain parts of the city, maybe they could split up the entire range of duty for street cleaning, and the private sector could take on some of the more inner city, while the City of Toledo could take on some of the more outer regions of the city overall. But this was a great idea. They had their impound lot where their vehicles were brought after being towed, a $1.8 million program. What the City of Toledo discovered was that they were providing this program with police officers, and there was a high cost to provide that program overall. So the idea was maybe they could come up with a public-private partnership for the impound lot. Leaf pickup, some various trash collection, and even parks and rec grounds maintenance types programs was another that lent itself really well for this discussion. And I'm sharing these specific examples with you because I'm hoping that you will reflect and say, wow, everything from leaf pickup to the impound lot to laundry services that you might provide is at least an opportunity for you to have your own Inglewood fleet experience. And our goal is to maximize the number of opportunities that you have and bring in partners to actually be able to pull this off. The program mapping platform that we have available to you, it kind of works like this. It's the type of situation where if you wanted to do a program mapping exercise and invite some neighbors, we can help you to use a tool to create the experience of sharing your data easily. That's what we did for Inglewood and Littleton, and we've actually broadened out the platform to make it a little bit more user-friendly. So the idea is you invite your neighbors, as Eric Keck said, maybe they have not participated and have their own program inventory. That's totally okay. You invite your neighbors. Obviously, you want this to be the case where you have their permission if they're sharing data and they have your permission to share data, and you use the platform to discover each other's programs. Here I'm searching on payroll processing as another example of a program that could be ripe for partnership overall. There are some opportunities to gather some stats on the other entities program from a cost perspective as well and its description overall, but here would be the way to begin to discover what the other entity is offering. Depending on who else you do bring in, here is an example of being able to scroll through the partners if they have their own program inventory to bring. Obviously, we would love to help them build out a program inventory together to be able to share. But the idea is you can begin to match up. This is exactly how the functionality works. Here I am looking at Arvada, Colorado's programs, and I'm matching up on snow removal and able to add some notes. This would be the way that the exercise is facilitated if you were to bring in some of the other entities nearby and trying to gather information on what they do. Lastly, Eric Keck's going to get into this. There is a way to tag some program opportunities in terms of your overall readiness. Are they kind of lofty, implausible partnership opportunities where it's very difficult and their readiness to do something is probably low? You can prioritize at least tagging programs with information about which are the best opportunities to consider versus others that seem a little more difficult to pull off. This is embedded within the platform as well. Short of the grand experience of the program mapping platform, within your own tools, we've used and we've encouraged many organizations to simply use the program comments functionality to tag on your own without necessarily, this is maybe a precursor before you need to pull neighboring entities together, being able to tag a program. In this case, here's 911 call tracking, and maybe the idea is, we're actually talking about the city of Aurora, Colorado, and Arapahoe County. Both have a 911 call center and the opportunity to have a partnership between them. You can have the foresight. You can go through and start tracking your own notes or facilitating a program commenting or program insight exercise with your own departments to get their ideas for external partnerships as well as internal partnerships. I should have mentioned, I know Jen from Duluth, Minnesota is on this call, and Duluth has had a great experience in terms of internal sharing of program information to look for centralized opportunities within the city itself, in addition to the kind of things that I'm showing, which include external program mapping opportunities. And then, of course, when it comes to program insights, one of our best examples, I know Diane's on the line, is the city of St. Albert, who, again, from an internal perspective, just gathered their own department's opinions for where opportunities exist. Granted, this is pre-COVID, but all of these opportunity areas that St. Albert had flagged for partnership ideas, partnering with external entities or insourcing for increased revenue, just like Inglewood Fleet. Many of these same program opportunities are perfect right now to revisit, going back into the tools and saying, what did we flag for insourcing from a regional perspective to drive up revenue versus looking for external partnerships where we might be able to repurpose some of our own resources overall. St. Albert did this pre-COVID. The data is still very relevant. For any of your organizations, you can still do this exercise right now, asking departments on a program by program basis, let's tag the program with the appropriate insight. If we really think it's an Inglewood Fleet opportunity, it's a Moffat County Laundry opportunity, let's get our ideas on the table, and then we can begin to prioritize and sluice overall. I'll wrap with this before handing it back over to Eric Keck. Clear Creek County, they pulled together agencies when they did their program mapping who had never really talked to each other, leaders from several nonprofits in their community who had not ever convened in this manner before, and generated a host of opportunities. They had close to 80% of Clear Creek County's budget associated with programs that ended up being tagged as an opportunity for partnership where others provide them. So that is the technique. And as I turn it back over to Eric Keck, I just want to reiterate how simple it is. Yes, we have a platform to help facilitate it and make your experience smooth and easy, but it truly is as simple as inviting other entities, sharing their program inventories, or even short of doing that, asking your departments to tag programs where you could be well situated and well positioned to be the Inglewood Fleet provider, or vice versa, where you're worried about programs that you can continue to provide on your own, and you're looking for, I bet the county has something like this, or the school district can help us with grounds maintenance. That's what we're really trying to help you plan for. Again, as Eric mentioned in our three-point plan, the time is pretty much now in planning ahead for where these partnerships could occur so that you're ready to execute if you have to 4 to 6 months down the road. All right. Eric, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Chris, if you could, stop share. There we go. Let's see here. Get back to where we were. All right, so we're going to now talk a little bit about how do we, once we've identified programs, as Chris talked about, how do we begin to qualify them? Or even how do we even start the process of having a discussion in the first place about programs? And so after having undertaken this and learned through the School of Hard Knocks, I figured out, first and foremost, we need some ground rules. And they're really quite simple, actually. One of the things is to examine each program and or service with an open mind towards collaboration. So in order to do that, as you know, even myself, when I was in city management or a department director, I would really have a tough time talking about my programs without a lot of passion or just passionately. But when you enter into an opportunity to talk about collaboration and programs within your community or organization that could be potentially looked at as collaboration, have an open mind. In other words, don't say, I'm going to be protectionist of my program, or geez, in 1990 we tried to do a collaboration and it failed. Have an open mind. Second, you want to quickly identify those programs where, again, there's overlap between jurisdictions that are duplicative. So examples are, if you're in a metro area, you're all probably doing utility billing, police patrol, wastewater treatment. And again, some of these are pretty complex programs, but it could be as simple as turf management, turf maintenance. In other words, cutting your grass, or irrigation management. Everybody's doing that same thing. Look for overlap of programs where you're doing it, your county's doing it, the cities around you are doing it, the school districts are doing it. Find things that are in common to actually begin to think about starting a conversation. Next rule is, again, refrain from dismissing a program and or service because you haven't actually done an actual policy analysis. In other words, you might have an intuition or a gut feel that something might not be plausible or a potential for collaboration because your organization is very proud of the fact that it provides its own whatever service that might be, fill in the blank. Again, go into it, dismiss that temporarily till you can begin what I'm calling the sluicing process of actually putting in all the things into the funnel and then bring out the nuggets, the golden nuggets at the end. Suspend your disbelief for a bit. Next would be, again, don't dismiss a program or service because you're worried about how it might impact the livelihood of you or your employees, at least, again, for a period of time until you can actually do an analysis of the program. And we're going to talk about treating people with respect and dignity a little bit later, but for the purposes of the exercise of just identifying programs, we need to do this. Next would be think globally. I mean, think in big ways. Don't limit yourself to thinking, man, that's just way too big. Insourcing a big program like fire or outsourcing a big program like 911 dispatch, think globally anyway. Identify it, and then think for ways in which you can find collaboration in your region. So those are some of the ground rules. Now we're going to talk about what I'm calling sluicing for results. And sluicing for results is just like this old historic picture. In the old days when mining happened, they had a sluice where they would bring in water that might contain some gold nuggets as well as some other materials that would need to fall out. But basically what you're doing with sluicing is you're identifying programs and how they will be filtered. So again, one of the ways to do that is to categorize the amount of disruption or resistance that a program is going to create. And what I mean by that is your organization receptive to change? Specifically, are they open-minded about alternative service delivery, and how much disruption would it cause? Next, identify that universe of alternative service providers. As Chris mentioned, we've done program mapping workshops in various regional locations in the United States and Canada and found all kinds of opportunities. But we've encouraged those organizations to invite folks to the table that might be able or willing to participate in that collaboration. Next thing that you want to do is evaluate programs according to mandate and law. Do your own charters of your organization prohibit you from looking at alternative service delivery? Do state laws or provincial laws prohibit you from looking at collaboration? Look at those first. And then lastly, when you sluice, and we'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail yet today, Think about the political support, whether it's your elected officials or your community. Are they going to be open to alternative service delivery and collaboration? So those are some ways to think about sluicing. So here's what I was talking about just a little bit ago about using a risk assessment grid. And on this grid, it's really quite simple. You're looking on the x-axis. Is it a small change versus a large change? Or is your organization on the y-axis open to change or resistant? You can map out each of the programs that you've identified for collaboration and see which ones could be accomplished. If it's small and incremental and a low risk, then that's a great program to start with. And again, what we like to do with our clients is encourage them to start small. Don't go for the big, most difficult, high-risk change you can come up with, because that's going to be difficult and a battle potentially. Start small, gain momentum, gain energy that you'll be able to work on to help you. So if we talk about opportunity qualification and differentiation, we like to do things in a kind of a organized fashion. And so we encourage folks when they're doing program mapping to do qualifications for programs for collaboration, such as forming an association, forming another layer of government. And then lastly, determine the priority for identifying your programs for collaboration. Which programs in your organization that you've identified can be tackled first? So as we continue looking at sluicing for results, we're going to filter those programs, and we're going to look at, again, structure. We're going to look at the cost and time involved. You're going to want to do a quick back of the napkin return on investment. Does the collaboration help you to save money, or will it cost you more to actually collaborate? And again, if an alternative service delivery method or system doesn't make sense, you can still use that. You can still use that program that's been tagged, but just use the data that you've gained from your program mapping exercise to look for ways to become more efficient. How is it that Littleton, Colorado is able to have a lesser cost for snow removal than Inglewood was? So let's dig into that data. Let's find out how we can be better. So the sluice really looks like this. So when you're sluicing, these are the filters that will work. What you're doing is you're pouring in all your different ideas, the disparate ideas that came from internal program mapping amongst your own departments. You may even reach out to the public, get ideas from the public, whether it's some quick polling using somebody like Polko or the National Research Center to help you identify where you could be potentially looking for collaborations. And then, of course, your external program mapping. You're going to identify those programs. You're going to evaluate them. First and foremost, again, return on investment. And then you're going to put it through the other filters, the political filter. Do my elected officials believe this would be worthwhile doing or capable? Does the public believe it's going to be politically viable? Then you're going to look at alignment. And alignment, we're going to talk about that. Alignment with your results, alignment with your strategies, your values. You're going to look at organizational impact. Again, how is this going to impact my organization? Because people provide programs. And so we want to make sure that we're treating our people with respect and dignity. And then lastly, we're going to look at mandate and reliance. Are we the only game in town? Are we mandated to provide this program? And could we look at an alternative service delivery? Once you've done with filtering, what you end up having is the gold nuggets, or the programs that are ready for collaboration. So let's look at mandate and reliance. So when you're going through mandate and reliance, again, same thing. Any legal challenges to that? Are there prescriptions in your organization that you are the only one that's able to provide the program? How difficult would it be to amend a law? As Chris might have mentioned, I think during his presentation with Washington County, Wisconsin, and their Counties Without Borders, they literally had to lobby the state legislature to change law to allow them to collaborate. But it made sense to do it, and it was worthwhile for the entire, not only their area, but for the entire state. So let's look at political filter real quick in this particular sluice. So with political filter again, how are your elected officials going to view alternative service delivery for a particular program? And more importantly, how would the public think about this? Would it be palatable for you to outsource solid waste pickup, garbage pickup to any of a number of companies that may be out there? Does that make sense for your community and your organization? So as you can see, we're beginning to just to go through all these different filters to see how this could potentially work. Then you can also seek feedback. Like I said earlier, getting feedback from the public is a good idea before you do make a major change. When I was faced with outsourcing fire in the city of Inglewood, I didn't have a lot of time, much like many of you may feel like right now, where you have this opportunity to engage the public. We did have some public hearings. We did have some contentious thoughts from people in the community that didn't want to see a 108-year-old fire department go away. But you still need to figure out, even if you're on a quick timeline, how can we gain some feedback from the public on this particular proposal? Organizational impact is probably one of the most important things, because this is where the anxiety factor in your organization is going to increase, because you're talking about jobs or people. Even if it's insourcing, people are going to get anxious about insourcing as well. Am I going to have to take on more work? Are we going to bring employees in from Acmeville? I don't like Acmeville. Those guys over there do things differently. Causes anxiety. So you need to spend some time in considering your organizational impact and whether or not your organization is even ready to accommodate and make that particular insourcing or outsourcing happen. And again, one of the things you want to look at very strongly is if you have any collective bargaining agreements that might be difficult in order for an insource or an outsource event to happen. And then again, would it cause organizational-wide anxiety? What is done to one department or with one program, people are going to begin to think, man, it could happen to me too, and it could cause some anxiety. So one of the things that I'll talk about in great detail in a little bit later is to make sure that you communicate very clearly to your organization about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how it will be done, and then show your employees that you're going to treat them with respect and dignity. The alignment filter is important as well. And as I mentioned earlier on, is it going to be aligned with your strategies and plans? A program that may have be done and identified right now for collaboration, is there a strategy that aligns with that? Does that make sense? Thinking about that, would it be in line with your organization's mission to be able to do that? Your mission statement. So again, use your strategies, your plans, your charters, everything like that to make sure that you're in alignment when you look at a program for collaboration. And again, would it conform to community values? Is the community going to value you still providing the program, but in an alternative way? So here are some lessons learned that I think are really important for us to take into account. And they're basically under three categories. First and foremost, communication. Communication is probably the most important thing to do when you're talking about a major change of a service program that's going to be either insourced or outsourced. You can't communicate too early, and you can't communicate often enough about it. You need to include all the stakeholders in your organization as well as your community to talk about what you're going to do and why. Be transparent. When I was dealing with the Inglewood Fire Department and the budgetary and capital equipment woes they were having, I was very honest with them and actually pulled them in to actually help. Either let's figure out the pathway that makes best sense, either keeping it and funding it appropriately, getting the equipment that's necessary, engaging their minds on what they could do to ensure that the structures change so that we could keep it, or did it make best sense to actually outsource? And we actually had those conversations. We're very honest about it. And we were really inclusive with our staff during that entire time. The next major area to think about is the people itself. Like I said, first and foremost, we're dealing with people's livelihoods. So the one thing that we want to do is make sure that we treat people with respect and dignity at all times. In other words, when I was dealing with Inglewood Fire and was telling them that there was a potential for us to outsource them to the city and county of Denver, there was a lot of fear and anxiety. But what we did do is we would tell them every step of the way what we were going to do, how we were going to treat them, how we were going to make sure that they were cared for if we in fact did make that decision, and we did, including to the point where we met with each employee and we told them how we were going to ensure that they had equivalency pay to the point in which time they were going to go with the city and county of Denver. So that's the next bullet point, which is be fair. We were fair with our employees. We also were very understanding. As you might understand, when you're talking about changing a program or service that's been ingrained within an organization for a long period of time, anxiety comes up, fear, stress. People are going to act differently. People are going to act out. We had some empathy and understanding. And then lastly, and just as important, like I said with communication, engage your employees in solutions, because they might be during a crisis like we're having now, so innovative that they come up with a way to actually reduce the cost of providing the service or delivering it in an alternative way for your organization. So use your people, engage them, don't make it top down. Nobody, even myself, likes change to happen when they're not actually able to help drive it. That's just human nature. And lastly, I want to talk about contracts. Contracts are really important as well. So when you're working on your contract for a new service, make sure that's clear on what you want. So for example, when we were looking at Inglewood Fire, we had a prescription in our community where we wanted to have ambulances stationed in our community, unlike the Denver Fire model where they were the nearest resource model. They were driving around and parking in parking lots. We wanted them in a firehouse. We made that clear in the contract. Denver put that into the contract. They're still delivering that fire-based EMS type of approach today. So people didn't see that change. That was what was important to our organization, and it mattered. We put it in the contract. It worked. Include dispute provisions as well. So what happens if service delivery, bringing somebody new in, it doesn't work like you think? Do you have an opportunity to talk about how can we remedy this? How can we fix this? How can we get back to where we need to be with the nature of the service in general? Include an exit clause. And again, this is just simple legal terminology here, but we forget about these things. If we can't get to a resolution of a dispute or it's not working out, can we gracefully exit? And then think about the scope of work too. Be exhaustive. So for example, when we put together the fire example for Inglewood, we wanted to maintain our own fire marshal, but we did include a provision that at such time the city of Inglewood decides that it wants to cease a fire marshal program, city and county of Denver could provide that service for us. And so it was already baked into the agreement, so we didn't have to go back and reopen it. So these are just pointers that I want you to think about as you move forward with your own program mapping initiatives. So really what we're talking about here today are ways in which to bridge the financial gap. You may have already gone through the GFOA checklist and exhausted many of the things that have been prescribed there. But you could actually use program mapping, regional collaboration, and outsourcing or insourcing to help bridge a short-term financial gap or the long-term financial gap. But remember that collaboration is a change initiative, and they need to go back to the previous slide where I talked about ensuring you have high communication and that you're very people positive. And in other words, you're engaging everybody as part of the solution. Lastly, I want to give you some other tips here, and that are collaboration. If you as a government are not considering collaboration right now, you're going to pay for it. And what I mean by that is you might be overpaying because for a service just because it's been traditionally provided. Or you could benefit from a collaboration where you're actually paying less for a service and still being happy with what you're getting. What I also think could be done, and obviously right now we're in the midst of the pandemic, but collaboration helps with being proactive rather than reactive. Creating the space. The nice thing is for your organization to take the time, dig into your PBBI data, your programmatic data, find ways in which you can collaborate. Look for ways to create a more sustainable future. But that can only happen if you're having conversations with each other. Innovate. Do some experiments. Experiment on ways of approaching challenges. Experiment on ways of delivering services that you could do differently. Engagement. Engagement's super important too, in that you want to make sure that you're engaging not only your employees, your elected officials, but your citizens as well. And then you can also roll in other layers of government. And lastly, as Chris has stated, and I will state to you as well, find what is uniquely yours. In other words, what would your organization be willing to collaborate upon? It doesn't have to be a big program like fire or 911 dispatch or even fleet, but there are other things that might fit specifically for your organization, and only you are going to know that. So take the time to have the conversations, to go through your data and figure out what is uniquely yours. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to allow Chris to jump in again and do a little conclusion here, but we definitely want to take any questions that you might have, and just appreciate your time today and your interest in how to collaborate regionally.
Thanks a lot, Eric, and please take advantage of the chat box or ask if you have questions for Eric on some specific logistics on how do you execute a partnership. That's what we wanted to use for the remaining period of time. I've got some roll credits here towards the end. Here's Duluth. We look at some of your beautiful neighbors and see opportunities, and certainly this could be a good experience. And that went into a paper airplane, flew away. Here's Lee Summit on the call, and certainly right in the middle of a metro area. Columbia, South Carolina was on the call. The capital city, local governments, nonprofits, private sector, the county, the university. Kalamazoo, also a university town, with the opportunity to create partnerships there. So you can be the catalyst. We were interested just to see, would we find any Moffat counties where it just doesn't appear that there are a host of opportunities there. Here's Ferndale. Fun fact, Eric, Fabian, and I resided long ago in Berkeley, Michigan, right next to Royal Oak, where our aunt still lives. There's Ferndale. Let's see, we've got something in the chat here. Oh, that's from Eric Keck. Here's Littleton. Littleton, Stacy, you already did a program mapping exercise with Inglewood. There are other organizations. Highlands Ranch also has a program inventory to take advantage of, but again, you don't even have to invite some of the other entities in. We've got Longmont here, and Longmont, not to forget that Boulder has its program inventory from a period of time, but plenty of partners here in the region. Plano, I know, is on the line, and I believe Casey and the gang know that Addison has its program inventory and could be a good partner overall. Here's South Jordan. Thanks for joining the call, Katie. Katie, you might be interested to know that Sandy, we have a discussion with them coming up on Monday. So they could be very soon embarking on a program inventory initiative, but clearly lots of others in your region to consider this for, including Draper. I think Eric Heck has some history there. And the unified government with Kansas City nearby with its program mapping data, certainly Shawnee and so many organizations nearby. The UG, you guys know about partnerships. You're already a merged city and county. And how can we roll this idea out even further? Well, thank you all so much for participating. Again, I hope that if nothing else, we have planted a seed in your minds about how you could, Katie, we'll follow up with you on the contact at Sandy and let you know where it's going. It's actually out of their council and city manager and CFO's office. But the overall idea is you have some time right now to possibly get some program partnership ideas on the table sooner than later. And hopefully maybe things bounce back and you don't necessarily need to execute on these. Wouldn't that be nice to have strategies and plans in place that you don't actually have to pull the trigger on? On the other hand, none of us know where this is all going to head next. And the hope is to kind of Three Little Pigs style, have you as prepared as possible. And program partnerships are definitely one of those solutions. So thank you so much for joining us here today. We've recorded this session, so we'll be posting it on the website as well. And I know that Liz Johnson sends out her weekly update on Monday. We have a webinar next week for those of you who are interested in using the program insights internally to begin to flag programs St. Albert style for all of the COVID specific blueprint opportunity areas. So tune in next week, and we'll be back to show you how that works in the tools. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Eric Keck.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Valletta.